Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we're going to paint a Delphinium, the first flower painting of 2022. So grab your paints and let's get started. Right then, we're going to start with a pencil stem. Delphinium is a tall, slender flower, if you've not seen one before, and the sort of probably the most classic colour is blue, a nice sort of cornflower blue, so we're going to paint in one of those. So at the top we're going to have a few buds that haven't quite flowered yet, and then as we get a bit further down the plant we're going to have some open flowers. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw the central circle of each of these flowers, because that is probably the most important thing that anchors the flowers. So when it's a bit more oval shaped like that, that's a flower that's sort of facing off in that direction. A circular shape like that is a flower that's more open faced and facing us right there. There's going to be times where we don't even see the central point of the flower. We'll just see the petals, but I'm just placing these in so I've got an idea of where I'm placing those flowers, and we'll have two more down there. I am going to be beginning at the top with my stem, and I've got a mixture here that's a ready-made mix in my palette because I use it so much, of Cadmium Yellow and Sap Green, but it's heavy on the yellow, and the green, the Sap Green down here, there's only a very little bit of it, but it makes me a really nice yellowy green that I use a lot of. And of course, as always, there's one of Crumble's hairs in the palette. He's everywhere I go. So I'm going to begin with what size brush shall I start off with? Use one of my little ones. I've got a 3/10 here. These brushes are my Pro Art, well, not my Pro Art, they are Pro Art Masterstroke brushes, and they're my favourites. And the really exciting news this year, sorry, more hair in my palette. The really exciting news this year is that you can now buy a set of these brushes featuring sizes that I think are really useful for painting my kinds of watercolour tutorials. So yeah, they're available in my Etsy store, and you can find the link to that in the episode notes below. So enough of the hard sell, let's get painting. So I'm going to begin a nice slender line down the stem, because we do see a bit of the stem at the top, and then I'm going to just begin by painting in a few rather slender, rather light stems, little branches coming off the side, both sides, angling upwards, but on the whole bending outwards. And what I'm now going to do at the very top, just with a clean wet brush, I'm going to use the colour that was already on the brush, on the page, to create some little buds. So I'm just doing a little oval. I'm not colouring it in, I want there to be that little bit of unpainted space. If the paint has already dried, then you can add a bit of colour. And now I'm going to start thinking about the actual colour of the petals coming in. Now I've got Cobalt Blue Deep here, which is just the perfect Delphinium blue. But like I say, Delphiniums do come in a number of shades and purples and different tones, so you could use a number of different colours. And I am going to take a very dilute bit of that colour and add it to the end of a green bud. So let's see, so begin the bud like that, clean off the brush, and then I'm just going to take a little bit of that blue and finish off the bud just like that. So we'll do another one, so a little U shape. It's possibly a bit too much water, but it'll be okay. So we're just starting the base of the bud, then finishing it off with a little bit of blue, and that little bit of unpainted space is making all the difference to give it a little bit of character and sort of detail. I'm just making sure that the blue gets painted on and then isn't messed around with too much. We don't want to over blend it in and get a bit of a sludgy colour. Okay, my buds are also going to get a tiny bit bigger as we go down the stem. I'm just going to place a few more of those in and then we'll get to the open flowers. I'm now going to focus on the flowers, and I'm using a size 0 brush. Still quite small, but allows for a nice level of coverage. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to really dilute down my Cobalt Blue Deep to a very, very pale blue, and we're going to use the loose controlled style that I love to paint in, which relies on layers of translucent paint to create these petals. So as I said previously, delphiniums come in a number of different sort of types, but on the whole they have a sort of rounded point petal, and I'm going to focus on this flower here, this circle here, because it's a lovely nice round one right in the middle. And what we're going to do is we're going to begin by painting in some petals which have got a nice, like I said, rounded point, but they are very, very dilute, and they're just going to sort of touch the inside of that circle. And then I'm going to take another one. I'm just really sort of using my brush to get the shape how I want it, and then I'm going to do a third petal. Really nice and dilute. So whilst that dries, because it needs to dry 100%, I can just go over the other circles. I recommend you beginning with the rounder circles that are in the middle of your flower, because they're the ones that are going to be sort of front and centre. And then once those have been placed in and are beginning to dry, you can start to add in your other flowers that are a bit more squashed over to the side. So let me demonstrate one of those. This one up here will work nicely. So the petals do sort of fall forwards a little bit, so begin one there. Or something even more flattened. With a really sort of squashed petal like that. So we're going to fill in all of those, nice and dilute. So now we've done our first 3 petals on each flower, and they've dried. I'm going to add in 2 more to begin with. So what's really interesting when I was researching delphiniums is they have 5 sepals that look a lot like petals, and then they have 4 actual petals. So they are a wonderful layered up flower. So that's why I've done 3, and now we're doing 2 more sort of in the gaps. So it'll potentially have a sort of slightly uneven look at this point, but once we put in the actual petals, it'll all start to make sense. So it's very important that your flowers have dried. And now we're just layering up with the same paint. These, I mean, I'm calling them petals, but they are in fact sepals. On so many plants, the sepal is green and it's the bit that sort of comes underneath the flower, little sort of folded back green, almost leaf-like things that sit just under the base of a flower. So you're learning something as well today, as am I, to be honest. That's what I love about doing these tutorials, is I do find out things. So yeah, I'm just painting in these 2 extra sepals, making my flowers just a bit more full and rounded. And at the moment, when the second layer goes on and it's still wet, it can look like you're just turning what was quite a nicely defined set of petals into a bit of a blob, but trust me, they dry nice and crisp and they do turn into separate layers. So just work your way through your flowers, and what we're doing is we're just building up a lovely sort of bulk of flower coverage, filling up this stem of Delphinium. These are nice and dry now, so we're going to now paint in a second or a third layer really of petals, and we're going to do it with a much more concentrated cobalt blue deep. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be quite clever with this more concentrated blue, and as long as you've painted your previous layer of petals really nice and dilute, this will work really well to create not only this next layer of stronger petals, but also the little sort of stamen filament like petals that sit in the middle. They're always a much lighter colour. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking my smallest brush and I'm going to paint a sort of outline of a petal, and then I'm going to paint in the petal, leaving some unpainted space there. I might just add a little bit more blue there, and then I'm going to do another one, and I'm going to paint in 4 of these. Like I say, there are so many different types of Delphinium flower that you could find one to really suit whatever it was you wanted to do, but I'm going to do this rather classic blue, and in doing this we create also a really handy guide for the central detail of the flower, leaving this unpainted space, allowing us to do a nice bit of painting with it quite easily once everything's dried. But I'm also going to pick up just a little bit of French ultramarine blue and just drop it in the centre here, and also just a little bit at the tip of the petal as well. And this is going to start creating a really nice characterful set of Delphinium petals and flowers. So let's go again. I'm always starting with the flowers that have the most open face. And if you go quite slow, then I recommend popping in that darker blue colour for each petal as you paint it. If you're a faster painter, you could paint all 4. But I think anyone who's starting out, who struggles to get the right amount of water and colour on their brush and wants to sort of time everything right so it hasn't all dried out before you get to it, then go petal for petal. So once I've done the outline and then I come in and sort of fill it in, all I'm doing is using a bit more water, not a lot of water, but a little bit of water is helping the paint travel just a bit farther. And remember to try and get a bit of sort of organic wobble with your little central unpainted bits. You don't want them all completely perfect and even. But you can see how important that central circle is to anchor every petal. So there we go. So I've done the outline, clean my brush off and just have water and just spread it around that petal nice and swiftly. And then just dabbing in some of that colour. Okay, I'm going to fill up the central flowers first, and then we'll look at how we work in the other flowers. So now we've done all the open-faced flowers, now it's time to look at the ones that are a bit on the side. So there are going to be some that the petals come up so far that we're not going to see much of the centre, and then there are going to be others where we do see a bit of the centre, so let's do one of those. So petal and the little unpainted space bits, just still making the most of that. Well, it's going to be more of an oval shape on these side petals. And there are going to be times when the petals are so sort of squashed like that you might only just see a little bit of unpainted space. And other times where this petal is just going to be little more than a blob like that. When we're not going to see any of the centre, we're just going to see more of the underside of the flower, we're really going to be only seeing little bits of those bluer petals. So if we imagine that petal is covering over the centre there, so my blue petal is coming up behind I'm still sort of imagining, still picturing it sort of starting from that central point. Maybe one coming out there and one sort of coming off there. So it's a bit of a case of lateral thinking, I think. But we're also going to be adding one last layer of detail once we've done this section of petals. So that one, which might look a bit peculiar at the moment, will all start to make sense. Of course, these petals, these flowers are going to be behind some of the central flowers. So we also can look at where we are not going to paint. This is a good example here. So I've got a petal coming there, but it's going to go underneath and underneath. So I'm just being very dainty with the brush, making sure those flowers that were painted before are dry, so they're not going to bleed and blend into each other. We're barely going to see any of this one. Okay, let's get all those painted in. Right, well done for getting through all of that. It's looking absolutely lovely. And now it's time for some fun. We're just going to work our way down and put in the rest of the stem and some more detail on the flowers. So I've got my nice little 4/10 brush, which is in the set that I'm now selling on Etsy, which is cool. And in fact, I'm going to change my water over now just to get it nice and fresh for these last detailed bits. So the stems are still protruding out just like they were up here, but we're not going to see that many, but we will see a bit. So imagine the branches starting there and then coming down in, so we'll still see a bit of stem here and there. So that pencil line was rather handy. Getting a little bit thicker towards the bottom. And in fact, I might just add a little bit of Sap Green towards the bottom. Okay. Then it's wherever, if anywhere, you can find places that your flowers will be growing from. It's not obvious. That feels good. Okay, and then that little bit of green gold, what we're going to do is just in the centre. So the centres of the flowers, basically right down in there is the stamen, and what I want to do, the stamen is that central sort of protruding bit, and then you have the filaments and anthers, the little sort of reproductive organs of flowers that are so vital, but can be a little bit hard to capture, so we do a little sort of suggestion of them. So I've got some shadow mix and then with a little bit of green in there, and what I want to do, I'll use the biggest one to do it. I'm just going to sort of paint in, it's almost like a few dashes of something in there, and then I'm just going to do a few sort of little lines that come out into these little lighter filamenty bits. So it's hard to sort of say anything more than we're just creating a few dashes, just a little bit of darker detail in the centre that then stretches out just a little bit. And when it all is together, it looks like it makes sense, but it sometimes can be a bit strained when you're just painting dabs and dots in the centre of a flower. Now, of course, not every flower, we don't see the central section in every flower, so we can look at how we're going to create the detail in those. So clean off that brush. So we've just only got one or two, this one and this one up here. What I want to do is just make a little bit more of the underside of the petal, and of course we'll be rubbing out the pencil as well. So with a bit of the Cobalt Blue Deep first off, just adding a layer of little sort of petal details to the underside of those sepals, a few lines. And in fact, I can then add just a little bit of that to the other petals so that it's not inconsistent. And helps them show up a little bit more. Now that we've used them for their light translucence for when we were painting the centres, now we can give them a little bit more. So just make sure your brush is still nice and dilute. And then for those ones that we were focusing on, I'll take my French ultramarine and just give them just that little bit more. So yes, so now I'm just sort of looking around, looking for places I can add little bits of detail. I think some of these buds, especially the larger, bluer ones, can have just a little bit more blue. Also, if you suddenly find a little gap there that you think, oh, that could have another little bud, then go for it. And then I'm going to use a little bit of the Sap Green, tiny bit of the shadow, to just add a little bit more detail to these ones at the top. Sort of under the base, maybe just a little line down the side. Or if you've got two overlapping, it's helpful to add a bit of a stronger colour there. And then down in and amongst. And there you have my controlled loose take on a Delphinium. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that. I can't wait to paint loads more seasonal flowers throughout the year. I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons for their support, because that support enables us to keep creating these videos that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed this one, then hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you got on with that one. And of course, if you never want to miss another video, just hit the subscribe button and that little notification bell down there. Okay, until next time, bye!